Hey guys, before we get started, I've got a quick favor to ask. I need you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast if you feel you're getting value from it. That's how we're going to get these conversations in front of more people. And just as important, if not more important, is your feedback. The good, the bad, the ugly. I want the critical information on how we can make this podcast better for you and deliver value every time. And if you know somebody in Louisiana who's doing big things in their field, industry, or business, please drop their name in the comments. We'd love to have the opportunity to bring them on the show. At the end of the day, this is all about the youth of Louisiana and putting local leaders in front of them and giving them something real to learn from. Now let's get it. What's up, everybody? It's your host for the For Profit Podcast, Matthew Pierce, and I've got the pleasure of having my friend Jordan Arcement, an NIL agent representative for collegiate athletes, here today on the podcast. What's up, Jordan?
What's up, Matt? Appreciate you having me, man.
Appreciate you for coming on. I want to talk a little bit about your origin story, where you come from, and we'll get to what you're doing today. So, tell us about the beginning. Where are you from, Jordan?
Yeah, I'm from Thibodaux, Louisiana, the Bayou, not too far from you, you
Yeah.
know, and came up humble beginnings. Was raised by my mother, pretty much by herself. My dad died whenever I was 11, and sports was a big contributor to my life and my progression and having strong men in my life, So I stayed in Thibodaux, went to Edie White, then Nicholls State, played football there, had some injuries during college.
Shout out to Southland Conference, huh?
Yeah,
Both players in the Southland Conference.
Southland, yes, sir. But after injury, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Football was all I really was passionate about, you know what I mean? And naturally, I fell into coaching. Coached high school football in the area for a while, and then that progressed to a collegiate career, and then ultimately now on the player side in the agent space.
Yeah, so I know in talking before this, you had a lot of different responsibilities in the collegiate ranks. Let's talk a little bit about where you got started in college and then where that progressed to being in the NIL space. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, whenever I was a high school coach, I got a chance to be a recruiting coordinator, and all of all the college coaches would come and they would get a chance to sit with me, right? And I would get to tell them about the players that were on my team and that were on the area and or in the area, and that was exciting for me, right? And I coached a kid named Devontavian Martin who ultimately ended up playing in the NFL. He had a pretty tough situation. His mother had died. I got a chance to be a part of his whole recruiting process, and once he went off, I guess it kind of inspired me. You know what I mean? I was ready to leave the high school rank and go in the college rank. And I think, with how you represent yourself and what you learn through sports ultimately can lead to opportunity. And it was my receiver coach from college who was then the director of player personnel at the University of Virginia. And he took me from the high school space to the collegiate space. And that was my start. My start started as a film evaluator, as a scout. And then kind of progressed from there. But yeah, that was the beginning for me at Virginia. Then ultimately kind of made a niche in recruiting.
Yeah. So what really put you on at Virginia, I remember you telling me this, you were bringing some Louisiana flavor to the Cavaliers. You had a little pipeline going, right?
Yeah, man. We were calling it LA to VA, and I knew the wave had caught when the fans were spelling GEAUX, who's, go who's, right? So I was like, oh, it caught, you know what I mean? They buying into our Louisiana touch.
So you spent time at Virginia, and then you ultimately were led back to Louisiana. But you had taken some time away from football in between those two opportunities, right?
Yeah, so at Virginia, I was there for 3 seasons. I started as an evaluator, kind of made a niche in recruiting, like I said, and then I was progressing there, and then COVID hit, right? And as COVID was going on, Tay, who I spoke on, right, short for Devontavian, he was at Washington State. They were trying to cancel their season during COVID, right? And I was still really involved in his situation. I helped him transfer to Oklahoma State during that time, and he was preparing for the NFL. And as he was preparing for the NFL, I started to learn a lot about the off-the-field business because I was helping him vet representation along the way. And NIL was coming down the pipeline. So as NIL was coming down the pipeline, it's COVID. We didn't have a lot going on. I'm just taking calls, and I'm realizing it's kind of the same game that I was learning because I was vetting people for him. And I'm like, the college landscape's about to change, you know? And when I realized that, I saw opportunity, and then he was going into his last season. NIL got passed, I didn't really trust someone else to have their hands on them. And at this point, it was just marketing. It wasn't what it became today. But I left UVA, and I spent a year as an entrepreneur. I started a business around the NIL space. I was doing his marketing. I was doing some other guys' marketing. We launched a 7-on-7 circuit for Shock Doctor. I even sold some life insurance on the side as a hustle,
okay.
just to get by in the midst of that. But ultimately, I lived in Louisiana, moved to Houston. I was able to be a part of his last year in college at Oklahoma State, where he led the Big 12 in receiving, and then he went on to play in the NFL. And when he made that step, LSU called and wanted me to come back to football. Okay. And I thought it was going to be a great opportunity, so I said,
which regime was that under? Was that on the tail end of Orgeron or Kelly?
It was right at the beginning of Kelly. So John Randall Belton, who's actually the assistant GM right now at LSU, he made it through the O regime, Kelly regime, and now the Kiffin regime. But I met him whenever I was at Virginia. He was at Louisiana Tech, and like me, he had some knee injury. So at the end of his playing career, he was still on scholarship, but he was working as like an interim director. And Joe Sloan, who was just previously the OC at LSU, now at Kentucky. But I knew Joe from recruiting Tay, right? And right when I got in the collegiate space, Joe calls me and says, you need to come interview at Tech for this director position, you know what I mean? And it was a better title than what I had at the beginning. So I'm like, I'll go interview at Tech. And JR, I could tell he had a really bright future. He picked me up and he was bringing me around Ruston and showing me around, and we were kind of going back and forth. And he was this young buck who was trying to interview me, you know what I mean? I'm like, who is this guy? You know what I'm saying? But we hit it off, right? And in time, I ultimately didn't take that job. And then when he graduated, I brought him to Virginia. Okay. So we've been together.
So then you were interviewing him, huh?
Yeah, so I got him on, and then I ended up leaving, though. I recruited him up there, and I'm like, JR, bro, look, COVID's here. Things have changed, bro. Like, look, it's a good place to be, but I got to go. And he's like, what? Well, I just got here, So he was able to progress there, and then ultimately he got hired by Coach O. And then when Coach Kelly was hired, Coach Kelly retained JR, and when he shined his light, and usually when he does that, people see the value in him. You know what I mean? He's got a really bright future, and he was able to then have some hiring power and have some say so in who should come onto staff. And he was you gotta come back. You know what I mean? And I also knew some other guys. It was a familiar staff for me. So some familiar faces, which some of them still are on this particular staff that had relationships with for a long time.
And you were player development at LSU.
It kind of evolved there as well, man. So like coming into LSU, I had made the niche in recruiting at Virginia, and then when I got to LSU, the first year was just strictly recruiting. I mean, I was just recruiting my tail off, just trying to prove that I belonged, and I was just so passionate about being in Louisiana and doing it for LSU. I mean, that was a dream, you know what I mean? Like you said, we played in the Southland Conference, but I really wanted to run out Tiger Stadium, you know what I mean? So
what little boy from Louisiana doesn't want to play football at LSU, huh?
Everybody does. My first time, I tell people my first time running out of the tunnel, it was actually in the Superdome. It was the first game. They actually let me coach. It was the wildest thing, bro. I coached the first game at LSU as on. It was just wild. Somebody, was sick or something. They needed.
You were getting them on the special teams.
Yes, bro.
Up in the spots.
Yes. So it was something else. But I ran out of the tunnel, and I mean, I felt like I was on a roller coaster. You know what I mean? I just couldn't believe the feeling, right? So it was awesome. And but yeah, it started off in recruiting, and then Coach Kelly saw the niche that I had in NIL, and I was the first person to do NIL for LSU football, and that evolved. My title was Director of Player Development, but really, because when NIL first began, it was such a gray space that, now we have general managers who are, openly negotiating contracts and getting sent on signing day. At that particular point, nothing was in writing. You had to just kind of discuss it and shake hands.
There was a lot of stuff that happened with athletes going to schools, promises that weren't delivered, and like, hey, what the heck? Where's the bag? Where's this or that?
So at that time, I would just have to tell, like, look, you got the leverage, you could transfer, you know what I mean? But you got to trust me, you know what I mean? Yeah. But I was the bridge the gap to what is now this, and so my title stayed Director of Player Development. Then ultimately it was, I think, like Director of Recruiting, Communication, and Community Outreach, something, you know what I mean? Something they ended up progressing it to, which I was thankful for, and but I think became pretty broad, you know what I mean? Because I had kind of spent some time in a few different departments through my time, which I'm thankful for, because ultimately now I feel like it sharpen my skill set for what I currently do.
Well-rounded and polished.
Yeah.
Obviously, relationships are very critical to what you do. I want to think back to your upbringing, maybe in high school, maybe along your stops in college. Who were some mentors that you looked to that really helped to shape and mold you? And
Yeah, whenever, my father died, I was going through it, man. Like, number one, I mean, my mom, just a praying mother who I think was ultimately so important. I mean, I was in the 8th grade. I remember I had a 1.3 GPA. If you'd asked me what I was going to do, I wasn't going to college. I did forget this job stuff. Like, I was just at this real crossroad where I could have took a real left. I remember that vividly, you know what I mean? And it was sports, and that's kind of what I touched on earlier, where finally in the 9th grade, I was like, you know what? I'm pretty good at this. If I want to pursue something or if I want to do right, I should take this right turn and not this left turn.
Yeah.
And I did. And, it was some coaches. My high school head coach, Kyle Lasang, was great to me. A man who really mentored me coming up, who's actually my physical therapist when I had a lot of these surgeries. But his son was in my class. Mr. John Degg is his name. And ultimately, truth is I got to give him a lot of credit for where I am. When I was a high school coach and I was ready to evolve to the collegiate space, Mr. John had a friend in the NFL, and he was going to the Senior Bowl, the All-Star game that just happened, right? And honestly, he was just rehabbing me. This was one of my last surgeries, and I said, man, that seems like a cool job. That's all. That's just what I said. That I didn't say anything else. And when he got back from the Senior Bowl, he's working me out, and he was like, I think I got you a shot, man. I think I got you in the door. And I'm like, what door? And he's like, the NFL. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, man. The dude said, look, I'm gonna connect you, yada yada. I get connected with the Cardinals. They put me in this scout school. I remember I'm driving on 311 in Houma, and I'm like, I just felt like my life was gonna change. The guy was like, what do you want to do? You want to be a coach? You want to be in person? What do you want to do? And I'm like, I feel like I know who the players are that are good, and I know where they should go. I always had that gift. And he's like, perfect, take the course. And I'm like, all right. So I took the course. I'm going from, I'm at Ellender Memorial on the east side of Houma, man. I'm not even the head coach. And I'm telling people, yeah, I'm about to go interview with the Cardinals. I'm taking the scout. And people looking at me like,
you're like crazy.
Going to the league from Ellender? You're not even, and I'm like, if that's what it sounds like, man, God got a plan. I'm going to trust it. And I ultimately ended up going to interview. I didn't get the job, which I just didn't make any sense to me. I was devastated, bro. I just felt like that was my chance, you know what I mean? And God works in mysterious ways. And just when I was, on the back in the east side of Houma, where we had this football field with no lights and the grass too long, I had put my coach on my resume, Justin Anderson, who was the one I spoke about as director of player personnel, and he called me like, yo, you got an interview with the Cardinals? And I was like, yeah, coach, I did. And he's like, is this what you want to do? I'm like, yes, sir, this is what I want to do. He's like, well, look, my department's growing, this thing's evolving. Why don't you come up here with me? And I'm like, here I come. And I took, not that I was making much money at all. I mean, a good living in my early 20s as a teacher with benefits. But I got paid $25,000 and I slept on an air mattress, you know what I mean, at first to ultimately flip it. And, but I knew I had to flip it quick, and I did, but I went with a different sort of hustle. But I bet on the opportunity because I believe that it could turn into more, you know what I mean?
I know we talked about that leap of faith and how many people that may be listening in our audience may think they have to do a certain thing based on their upbringing or their environment, small communities that they come from. We're really looking to inspire the youth, especially here locally, that not to be afraid to step out of that mold to take that leap of faith,
No doubt. And I think when we're kids, everybody has something inside that they want to be. Just the other day, Matt, you actually were helping us move into this house with an athlete of mine, and it was a beautiful thing. He got his family a house in the midst of this NIL era. But on the way to Gonzalez from New Orleans, I was talking to his little sister, and I was just asking, what she wanted to be when she grew up, and she said a singer, and she's like, a singer, and I want to do hair, and singing makes me happy, and, and I was like, do you practice singing? She's like, yeah, and people ask me, why am I always singing? And, and I just encouraged her to follow that and trust that and not let anybody put you down, because I feel like along the route, right, people speak their fears on you.
Absolutely.
If they've never tried to
see it for themselves, they can't see it for you.
Yes.
And the audience needs to be very wary of that and to, protect your goals and your dreams. Share them with your innermost circle, but definitely be, loose lips sink ships, as I like to say.
And just, I tell people, find somebody who's doing what you want to do or living how you want to live and listen to them. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's hard to listen to somebody who's not in the position you want to be in because their advice will probably lead you right where they are. You know what I mean? And
absolutely,
it was somebody I grew up with, and it was cool because we got to speak not too long ago in this capacity and like a working is Trevon Reed. He's the cornerback coach at USC, and we came up playing park ball together. Trevon and I would be in the backseat of the coach's car. We'd both just need a ride to the game because of our situation, and he's at USC now, and he wanted a player that I had. But when we were young, I remember somebody saying to him, somebody was better than him. And it wasn't that he was being arrogant, but what he said was, no, he's not, and I'm not going to put myself down for nobody. You know what I mean? And he didn't even know this, but when I would listen to him say that, and it stuck with me, and it's not an arrogance, but it's just a self-belief, you know what I mean? Because you got to have it, you know what I mean? And I'm not going to put myself down for nobody either, you know what I mean? Because I believe that I can, you know what I mean? I think ultimately that's what it takes,
Yeah, no, going back to that family and helping with the NIL, being able to bless people around you. I know you're very passionate about relationships and people, taking care of people and guiding people. How do you take that into this NIL era? I mean, I see you doing it, but explain to the audience, like.
Yeah, well, truly, man, I feel like it's where passion met purpose.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And when I was on the team side, when I got to LSU, right, the first person that I got to sign to LSU was Kyron Lacey. I mean, the day I got to LSU, I got to offer him a scholarship. He's from my hometown. I watched him come off the basketball court to the football field. He chose LSU, you know what I mean? And through my time at LSU, this game had evolved so much, and there was so much business that I was getting involved in. And I felt like, I came up as a player. I came up as a coach. I had a 7-on-7 team. It was always about pouring into the young man. And not that I wasn't able to pour into the young men because I was around them, but I felt like it just became, again, nothing wrong with the business side, but it just became where I felt like I was having to conduct business, but spend less time with the boys, and tragically he took his life. And, I said my dad passed whenever I was 11. He took his own life as well. So that one really, really hit home for me. And, whenever that happened, I felt like I just really went back to alignment in the sense of like what's
being
really
more involved with the players versus the
yes. And again, on the team side, you can find a role where you can. Just for me, I felt like it wasn't as involved as I wanted to be. And when I had this opportunity with Athletes First, and my job literally is pouring into them and helping them progress.
It's you're now on the side of guiding versus attracting. Right. 'Cause when you're working for the entity, for the LSU, you're recruiting, you're pulling in. You want to influence them and help them to make the right decisions. But when you're their representation now, you're more of a guide.
Yes. And whereas on the team side with attracting them in, right, we had a staff that was so large. I mean, every team does, you know what I mean? So, like, it's not that you passing them into good hands, but a lot of times it's like you're recruiting, then you getting them in, and then there's a group of people who take them, and you know what I mean. The coaches are coaching them, the teachers are teaching them. Study hall, weight room, people who deal with them in every regard. But then I'm right back to recruiting, or then it turned into where I'm right back in the community. I'm fundraising, just different things that were important for the program, but not necessarily what I felt in my heart. What I was supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? So when I had that opportunity, and I felt like it would bring me back to where it started, you know what I mean? I wanted to do that. This time it just was at a much different level. You know what I mean? I used to pack up a van and drive kids to camps and talk to the coaches about getting them an offer. I didn't know what I was preparing for. I was just doing that because I was trying to give them an opportunity. It was fun to me. I'm like, oh, this is cool, Alabama or LSU or Georgia, wherever school we were at. Yeah. But ultimately I was trying to put them in position. That's what I was doing. And that was just out of off the strength, I guess, because I wish somebody would have took me and did that. I went to Nichols because it was in my hometown, and I didn't go to a single camp. I didn't do anything in the off season. I just played sports, and then ultimately it was like, yo, you come and play at Nichols? Yeah, I'll come play. But now what the process has turned into and what I've seen it turn into is like, oh, no. I could put you in position, you know what I mean, and help you propel, you know what I mean, and ultimately could be in position to really change your family's life,
Yeah. So maybe some of our audience don't quite understand how NIL works nowadays. I know you're helping to negotiate compensation and things like that. Explain how that goes when you're talking to a university, when you've got a player that you believe in, that you're trying to help make good decisions and vet those people, like I said, being a guide.
Yeah. Well, NIL is evolved tremendously since the beginning. It started off as just marketing. Sometimes it's still framed as marketing, but now, we're in this revenue share era where the university is actually able to pay the kids directly. So on signing day, you get a scholarship.
Is it like 3 legs you had mentioned to me one time, or three buckets?
Yeah. So you still get your scholarship, right, and a check that's cost of attendance. Then you get a revenue share contract, which is directly from the university, right? Those terms will be worked out, negotiated, language, cash flow, amount, etc. And then now it's about how to beat the cap. So there's like a third-party bucket usually, and then that contract has language, cash flow, etc. And then collectively that is your total deal. But, I go out, I recruit, I sign, similar that I would if I was a college, and I look at it almost like I would be a position coach, right? Like I'm recruiting, and now this is like my position. You know what I mean? This is my gang, and then we attack whether it's them coming into college initially, whether it's their renegotiation, whether it's the transfer portal, and then I aspire to be certified and follow them until the NFL and ultimately represent them through their career. That's an aspiration of mine.
So aspirations to get to the NFL and be a Players Association agent. Let's talk about some of the habits, your routines that have kept you consistent and led to your success. Some of the things you fall back on.
Yeah, man. That's the beauty of sports, right? I think sometimes whenever I see kids who are rough around the edges, I push them at a young age to get into a collegiate program because I know how much that can change your life because of the structure, the discipline, the routine, the time management, et cetera, discipline with you have to eat, weight room, but it teaches you so much for life. And I feel like it taught me a lot, and I kept that same concept. And I think, with me pouring into young men, and ultimately wanting to be an example, I try to be disciplined as if I was a pro athlete, right? So just with how I take care of my body, what I put in my body, and, the structure of my day, you know what I mean? But what I always have on my pen and paper when I'm listing out the night before what I'm going to do tomorrow is pray, read, think, right? So I try to, wake up and pray, which I feel like it just ultimately keeps me in a good spot, you know what I mean? Read a book, something that's going to do something for me mentally, and then think, you know what I mean? But spend that time on coming up with a plan, you know what I mean? Because it takes having a plan, you know what I mean? And then execute, you know what I mean? But I think books have been so important. I call it like, it's the mentor you never had, or like it's the information that you can find, right? When some people like, I just don't know anybody in my circle. I don't have somebody to tell me. Is like, bro,
somebody's written a book about it.
Read it. You know what I mean? And it can take you to a whole nother level. So I think, that's just, on a small scale. And then, I think consistency with exercise is a big piece for me, and that keeps me feeling good. It keeps me in a good mental space. And I'd say just anybody out there, man, just protect your mental. You know what I mean? And what are the things that you need to do that help you replenish? Or what are the things that pour back into you to have a full cup to then pour into somebody else? You know what I mean? But finding those things.
So when difficulty has struck or adversity has hit, we talked about discernment. What are some of the things that you do, like those guiding principles, to make those decisions or to overcome that difficult time?
Yeah, I think early on when adversity hit, for me, I didn't understand why what happened to my dad did. I didn't know why he did that. I didn't know why God would let that happen. And even though I had a strong faith, I questioned, like, why? You know what I'm saying? And ultimately it took a long time, but then whenever Tay became in my life and he had just lost his mother, and ultimately I ended up becoming a guardian of his little brother, and he lived with me. He still does, has a room at my house. He's in college now, but from ninth to right now, you know what I mean, he's been with me. And they had lost a parent, and then, you know, being there for people in the midst of what happened with Kyron and whatever else, right? Like, ultimately that happened to me, but I'm able to then help the next person get through a situation that's similar. And that was kind of the full circle. Finally, now it took a while,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? A lot of times whenever adversity hits, sometimes you just have to be patient and see the full circle come, but God has a plan, you know what I mean? And you got to prevail, you know what I mean? You got to prevail and push through. So that, and then I had a bunch of surgeries on my left leg. That was real adverse for me because all I knew was sports. So it sat me down, you know what I mean? It humbled me. It taught me a lot. It taught me also perseverance, you know, and again, getting to be there for athletes who, whenever they have an injury, I know how tough it is mentally. So pouring into them, picking them up, giving them that advice. So I saw why that came full circle as I became the athlete advocate, because I understood, you know what I mean? So now when an adverse situation comes up, it's easier for me to deal with because I just lean on past experience, right? Like I didn't know how I was going to get through lots of things, you know what I mean? And I got through. So it's like, nah, it's always gonna, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel. You know, this storm shall pass. There are better days, and really leaning on my prayer life in those times.
Any favorite scriptures come to mind? I know you're a man of faith.
All things through Christ who strengthens me. You know what I mean? I know the plans for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. That's probably my favorite, you know what I mean? And I really lean on that one. And that, just to my point, right? Like, I know I'm going to prosper. This is just going to teach me something in the midst of the adverse situation, you know?
You know, as recently I've been, I just finished up the book of Job. I've been going through the Bible. I was raised Catholic, you know, kindergarten through 12th grade, very religious upbringing. And then one thing I think Catholics don't do enough is read the Bible. So I've recently been attending a men's Bible study. Shout out my boy, Jeff Raybon Construction. He was on the podcast earlier this year. Top general contractor and remodeler here in the Baton Rouge area. It just inspired me to get into the Word more, read the Bible more. And I think there's no better testament to faith and like trust in the process, like for not knowing why things are happening in the book of Job. Like he starts off, he's got all these great things, and then everything gets taken away from him, but he never curses God. Now he's struggling with why is all of this happening? And then God shows up in the end and is like, these things are to teach you to have you lean on me, to not lose faith, to build you up. And I lean on things like that. When I'm going through adversity, I try to, okay, what is this trying to teach me? You know, he didn't intentionally do this to me. There's a lesson to be learned from this. And I think it's that optimistic mindset, knowing that everything is going to work out in your favor, and trying to find, okay, where's the lesson in this? Because I know this is going to help me to evolve and develop.
No doubt.
And that definitely shows up when you're going and striving for more, right? When you get out of that comfort zone, you are going to experience that disconnect from where you're at to where you're going, and in the middle feels very uncomfortable and very uncertain, and new problems show up.
But it takes that trust and belief, you know what I mean? I think whenever they were marching to the Red Sea, they didn't know it was about to open.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You just was marching, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
when
then
we get out of Egypt,
then ultimately when you got there, it opened and you were able to walk through.
To make a path across.
But you didn't know that. You just was marching. You know what I mean? And last Sunday, I was on the David and Goliath piece, and that really inspires me because it was like, you know, sometimes David is painted like he was just this little sheep boy, and he was this mild, meek type of dude, but that wasn't necessarily the case. You know, David was watching after the flock, but whenever a bear tried to take the sheep, whenever a lion tried to take the sheep, David went see about it. You know what I mean? He got that lion and he got that bear. So whenever he stepped up when Goliath was taunting everybody and saying, y'all guys not real, and if he was, step to the plate. You know what I mean? Show me your guys real. And they were like, David, you're not equipped. You know what I mean? But David had been preparing. You know what I mean? So God was preparing him, right? And that's where, like, when I talk about those situations, it's like sometimes those situations just preparing you for the next one. But everybody was counting him out. But he was like, nah. This is not my first rodeo, and I got God. You know what I mean? So he stepped to the plate, but he really was courageous. Whereas a lot of time he gets painted as meek, but it wasn't. He knew he prepared and he trusted, right? And then when his opportunity arose, he struck. You know what I mean? And then it became this, this David versus Goliath piece. But that one, last Sunday, it just got me going. You know what I mean? Where I was like, and we all, I guess, have our Goliath, or like the thing that you looking like, man, like this is gonna be a feat, like I'm up against something. But I think just like the preparation,
if you
and
lean back on the preparation, and that's definitely something that college football teaches you. Golly, the amount that you prepare for game day, from lifting weights to film study to practicing to walkthroughs, to bring that into life, you fail to the level of your preparation. And in all the past experiences that we have, the adversities that we face, if we can find the silver lining, the lesson in those things, they turn into blessings in the future. What's something you would tell your younger self if you could go back and learn a lesson quicker? What would it have been?
Listen. I think I probably... I think trusted more. You know what I mean? Like, it took me a long time for everything to come full circle and start to trust to the level that I do. You know what I mean? So I think as a young man, sometimes it's a struggle to trust the process and to understand that everything is gonna work out. You know what I mean? In your favor, as long as you stay the course. So I think if I could speak to the younger me, it would be to keep pushing and probably to do more at a younger age. You know what I mean? Where it took me a little while to really. It took, honestly, probably until college where I really, like, took to everything, like the process, the hard work, the sacrifice, the dedication. You know what I mean? I probably would have did that more so in, like, 9th grade, you know what I mean, than a freshman in college, And I think that's what I would do.
Do you have any unpopular, what would be considered an unpopular belief about business or about leadership?
I think I do, It goes back to the books, right? I'm actually rereading a book right now by Dan Sullivan that 10 times is easier than 2 times. And the concept is, if you're growing 2 times in business, which is what most people by default do, or most times push to do, you know what I mean? Even from maybe your leader, where it's just doing the same thing but more of it, and you think you're gonna get this great result, but like, you only have so much capacity. You know what I'm saying? So by just doing the same thing and more of it, you'll never be able to scale to the level that you ultimately may want to grow to, right? But it says 10 times is easier than 2 times, because to grow 10 times, it takes a whole different way of thinking. It takes a whole different process, and it takes a system, and it also takes the right people around you, which the next book is called Who Not How, right? So it's finding the right who instead of asking how. It's who can do that task and putting them in place to do it. But ultimately, it helps you scale up and then take yourself 10 times,
Love that. And lastly, for our audience, podcast is called For Profit. It doesn't necessarily have to mean in the business sense of what everybody thinks of profit. When you hear that profit or for profit, what does that mean to you in your life and where you're going?
The first thing that comes to mind, and I guess sometimes I refer to it as the gain, right? Like the gain means I'm viewing things in a positive fashion, like no matter really what's going on for me, and being able to frame that it's for my gain. So I would say, like, in life, the profit, right? Like if I'm in the profit, it means that I'm grateful for what I have. I'm in surplus. You know what I mean? I'm lending. I'm not having to borrow. But I'm just doing well in life. You know what I mean? And that could be in any facet. It doesn't
You can be
mean
more for
business.
everyone. You can be more for everyone. When
exactly.
we have,
So I don't mean necessarily in business. I mean, it could be in my relationship. It can be in my mentorship. It could be in my job. But just being in the profit, where I'm able to I'm able to help. You know what I mean? I'm able to give.
Absolutely. I love that, man. Well, look, I appreciate you stopping by today. I think it was a fantastic show, and look forward to having you on in the future, brother.
I appreciate you having me.
All right, big dog.